Welcome to this mini lecture on philosophies of education. This presentation highlights 5 major philosophies: perennialism, essentialism, progressivism, existentialism, and critical philosophy. For the purpose of studying the philosophies, we'll make some sharp distinctions between them. In practice, however, there is much crossover and gray area. We would not expect someone or something to express only one of these belief systems, but a blend of several. Therefore, we might think of the distinctions between philosophies as somewhat artificial, but they're helpful to us as a study tool. So, what is philosophy, and what do we mean by a philosophy of education? Philosophy comes from the Greek word philos, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. Philosophy is an academic discipline used to critique theories, viewpoints, and systems. Sometimes philosophy helps us make sense of the world. I like to say philosophy is a particular way of thinking about the world and analyzing problems. A philosophy of education, then, is a particular view or approach to education and used to explore questions such as, what is education and what is its purpose? What do we teach and what is the role of the teacher? For our purposes, a philosophy of education is a systematic way to critique the institution. Because we live in a diverse society, people express many different philosophical ideas. Here is a continuum that helps us understand how the major philosophies can be thought of as more traditional leaning or more progressive leaning. Again, this is just a tool to help us begin to identify a particular philosophy that a person or curriculum or culture might express. These are Western philosophies, of course, applied to our westernized education system. A more traditional leaning philosophy would see education as an institution to maintain society and preserve its traditions. It would tend to be top-down, and curriculum would focus on Western ideas and literature and authors. A more progressive leaning philosophy would see education as the institution to challenge the norms and traditions of society. It would tend to be more forward-looking rather than looking to preserve the status quo. It would tend to be more democratic rather than top-down, and curriculum would tend to be more diverse. So, let's begin by looking at traditional philosophies of education. They have roots in ancient Greek ideas about education with the focus on the, quote, traditional subjects, including math, science, social studies, and English language arts. The purpose of school is to transmit cultural knowledge and prepare students to function in society. The two main traditional philosophies we touch on here are perennialism, which suggests the purpose of education is to teach classic knowledge as timeless truth, and essentialism, which suggests this classic truth does in fact change with times as we grow and learn scientifically. So, what might these traditional philosophies look like in practice? How could we identify an expression of traditional philosophy? Well, you would probably see a standardized curriculum where all students receive the same content and instruction. This would make sense if the purpose of school is to preserve and maintain society, right? The content would, of course, emphasize themes of Western civilization. The role of the teacher would be that of expert, whose job is to transmit knowledge to students. And importantly, A democratic society is said to depend on a shared common knowledge, and the purpose of education is to preserve that common knowledge. Moving on, what are the big ideas about a progressive philosophy of education? Progressivism tends to be more forward-looking. Curriculum might emphasize reform. Teachers are seen more as coaches and facilitators. And education tends to be driven more by the needs of students rather than the needs of society. So, how might we identify the expression of a progressive philosophy? Well, you would probably see a more student-focused curriculum, which means content wouldn't be limited to the classics of science and math and language arts and social studies, but would maybe include career and technical education. Content would emphasize preparation for life and a theme of lifelong learning. The teacher's role, again, would be more a facilitator of coach. Next, we look at existential philosophy. This philosophy focuses on experience and emphasizes human experience as truth. Existentialism is a form of a progressive philosophy. So, what might this look like? How could we identify an existential philosophy? Well, you would probably see an emphasis on arts and languages. Students are considered unique individuals who need to develop their own authentic knowledge about the world. The teacher's role is to help students become individuals and create their own truths. An existential philosophy might include experiential learning, such as a study abroad or an internship. Finally, we come to critical philosophy. Like the name implies, a critical philosophy emphasizes power relations and sees education as a political activity. Education is seen as indoctrinating students into the ways of a dominant culture. Therefore, teachers are positioned as agents of change and advocates of social justice. The purpose of education is change and equity. So, what might this look like? How would we identify a critical philosophy of education? Well, you would probably see a curriculum that challenges the traditions and norms of society rather than working to preserve it. Students would be considered unique individuals who need to become their own advocates and agents for social change. A democratic society is viewed as a constant struggle between the values and beliefs of different groups. A critical philosophy of education might be expressed in a curriculum that contains critical race theory in its instruction. So we're back to the continuum. I think it's easier to begin thinking about the philosophies as falling somewhere between more traditional and more progressive. The essentialism and perennialism philosophies tend to be more traditional. The existential and critical philosophies tend to be more progressive. So we come to this question: why do we want to understand the philosophies of education? Why should we care? What's the point of it all? Well, I think philosophy is an important tool for understanding and critiquing the institution. It's also important to understand the philosophy of education leaders. That would help us understand where the field is headed. I'll leave you with this important question. By the end of this semester, after I have read all of your work and learned something about your perspective, What philosophy of education will I attribute to you?